Hello students, this is Mr. Nason, and today I'm going to evaluate the debate. So there was 2 days of debate, and we were debating on the historicity of the resurrection, and there was an affirmative side that was stating that there was historical evidence for the resurrection, and then there was the negative side that was trying to say that the positive side didn't have enough evidence to prove a resurrection, and that sort of a debate. Instead of making the evaluation in class today, because you guys aren't here today, I decided I would put it online, put it on an ed puzzle, and make it extra credit. So I'm going to make this extra credit. If you want to watch it, great. If you don't want to watch it, that is fine too. But I will be evaluating the debate, which means I'm going to be saying things that one side did good, things that one side didn't do so good, things where we can improve, things that maybe ought not to have been done, those kinds of things. And I understand criticism over stuff we've worked very hard on is difficult to listen to at times. That's one of the reasons I'm making this extra credit. But I understand it. You know, you work hard, you do all the research, you write the paper, you put it out there, and then somebody tells you you should have done it differently. I get that. I've been studying the Bible for 20 years, worldview and apologetics for probably 15 at least, looking at atheist debates, Christian sides, reading literature, all of those kinds of things. And then when I teach it to students, high school students, they tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. And so I get it. I absolutely get it. Critique and evaluation does not ever really feel good. However, knowing that you actually know what you know, that allows you to take the critique and maybe listen to it, understand it a little bit more, and then maybe massage or nuance your side so that you could actually write it a little bit better. And so I'm going to evaluate both sides of the debate. The affirmative position was stating the historicity of the resurrection, that Jesus actually rose from the dead, and we have historical information that says that he did, and so now we have to evaluate that best explanation. There was no clear establishment of the worldview or the use of laws of logic. All spectrums across all of the classes that I taught and all of the debate that we listened to, there were attempts to talk about it, but it wasn't really clear on worldview and where logic comes from, and forcing the atheist side to stay on their plane, and if they're going to use logic, then ground it in an atheistic worldview, all of those sorts of things, so that the skepticism that comes with logic would not just shred the Christian perspective aside, because it's assumed from an atheistic perspective. In other words, there needs to be balance about that position, and the only way to do that is to expose the fact that the atheistic worldview has no ground for logic, has no ground for a brain-mind distinction, has no ground for consciousness, self-awareness, those kinds of things that allow us to reflect and make decisions. The truly naturalistic, materialistic, atheistic position, there is no such thing as choice. You don't have a choice to make one way or the other. You're driven by the chemicals in the brain. That was not firmly established by the Christian side, and so it left the atheist with the logic on their side. There wasn't also this evaluation of evidence from history. There's two steps in the prongs of looking at evaluating historical evidence. Number one, what is considered evidence from history. What is considered evidence from history? Well, it's historical documents, archaeology, archaeological finds, artifacts, those kinds of things are historical. They're from that time period. And when you can date them into that time period and find out that they speak to the issue that you're talking about from history, then it becomes historical evidence. It just becomes historical evidence. Without evaluation, we have not evaluated it to see what it says about history yet. We're just dating it to that time. Manuscripts and artifacts. We focused in this debate on manuscript evidence in history. And then once you have several sets of historical evidences from a specific time period that speak to a specific issue, then you can evaluate that evidence. You can say, because this person said this, because this other person said this, because this other person says this, and you put it all together, what is the best explanation for the evidence? This is where inference, logic starts to take place. What is the best explanation for the historic evidences that we have found? That was not made clear in the debate either. And because of that, the evaluation of evidence was placed by inference already, and so it was rejected as even historical evidence without saying, no, it's actually historical evidence, but you're not agreeing with the best explanation for that evidence. And so that distinction was not made clearly. Had those two been, the affirmative position would have been much stronger. Now, the negative position won out in the debate in most of the classes. I think it was pretty close in a couple of classes where you could almost say they kind of tied. But the negative position won out in the debate. They stuck to logic and empirical data from an atheistic perspective, and they really used skepticism to drive home the fact that there was no logical necessity to believe what the Christians said about the evidence at hand. There's no causation. Even if we give you that Jesus rose from the dead, the cause of that resurrection cannot be linked to the fact that Jesus was the Son of God. That was their mantra. That was where they drove things. And they did it very well. And it was very, very well done. They represented the atheist position very, very well. There's a couple of critiques in here, a couple of evaluations. Evaluation of evidence from history. There were some suggestions that Jesus was not a historic figure at all. This comes from a group. It's a small group, but it's a group of people that will claim that the Bible, the Gospels, and even some of the epistles were written to support a mythology, and that mythology was focused on a not real person named Jesus. Now, again, if you look at the general consensus, not from popularity, not from secular people, not from people that are not in positions, if you look at the consensus of people in the field of history, they teach history, they've written in history, they have scholarly, peer-reviewed things in history. There is not people in that field that will deny that Jesus was not an actual person and that he was, so they will say Jesus was an actual historical person who was crucified under Pontius Pilate. The two things that are most secure in history about Jesus is that he was baptized by John the Baptist and that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. The rest of it is debated within the history departments of universities and seminaries and those kinds of things. And then Once those things are then established, then it's the best explanation of that evidence to explain who Jesus was and what he actually did. Was he the Son of God? Was he just a good teacher? Then after all the historic evidence is found, then the evaluation of that evidence should come. But again, there's a group, it's called mythicism. And what they're saying is that the New Testament, especially the Gospels, were written as myth, not history. And the man wasn't real. It was a myth around a fictional character, much like we would say Batman is not real. And neither is his secret identity. For Superman, it would be Clark Kent. Bruce Wayne is Batman, right? So Bruce Wayne and Batman were not real. So Jesus and the Son of God were not real. They were myth, and Jesus was written in to myth to support the fact of this Son of God. But neither existed. That's that small group. But they are outside the scholars. And if you want, I've got videos that I'm connecting to this particular assignment by Matt Dillahunty, the man that I gave you as the skeptic atheist, as to formulate your debate based on his debate when he debated Mike Winger over the resurrection. He evaluated Bart Ehrman and Bob Price in their debate of the historicity of Jesus. So Matt Dillahunty was the moderator of that debate, and then he gave an evaluation to a group of people that were learning how to debate and what was the best ways to debate and those kinds of things. Matt Dillahunty agrees with Bart Ehrman that Jesus was a historic figure and that the mysticism people that are out there don't have evidence to support that that's actually true. Now, he had some issues with Bart Ehrman as well, and you can watch that in the debate. But it is a consensus of atheists and Christians that Jesus was a historic figure. So in other words, to take that on as part of your main premises in your debate is to open yourself up for extreme criticism by both atheists and Christians. It is better to take what Matt Dillahunty did in saying that I'll give you the fact that Jesus was alive. I'll give you the fact that the disciples believed that Jesus was those things. But the case still remains that whether they believed it or not, was it in fact true? And that is the stronger case in the atheist place. And so that is the better place to go. How we demonstrate Jesus rose, the resurrection. I want to demonstrate that from the Christian perspective. We are a Christian school. We do believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that he is a historical. But how do you do that? This debate was won by the atheists in most of the classes. And so what does that mean? Does that mean Jesus wasn't a historic figure? Does that mean logic and empiricism is the way to go? Does that mean everything that I believe is wrong? No, absolutely not. Now, worldviews matter. There's matters in worldview. It makes a difference. Logic is neutral. We talked about this. Logic is like a handgun that is sitting on the table. The handgun that's sitting on the table is never going to do anything good or bad by itself. It is merely just a tool that is sitting there. A knife, for instance, could be on the table. It's not good, it's not bad. It's just a knife on the table. A person picking up the knife can use it to slice bread, to cut meat and eat and ingest the food that they need, or feed a sick friend. that sort of thing. And it can be used for good purposes, or a knife could be used for a robbery. Give me your purse or I'll stab you with this knife, kind of an idea. And so the knife itself is a neutral tool, but when it's picked up, it can be used by somebody for good or evil. It could be used for right purposes or wrong purposes. It could be used because the person using it determines which way it will be used. Logic is the same, not necessarily good and evil as far as morality goes, but worldviews go. When an atheist picks up logic, they use it in an atheistic worldview, and they shred every other worldview with that logic from within the logic of the atheistic worldview. When the Christian picks it up, they use that logic within a Christian worldview, and they try to dismantle every other worldview that is out there. And so the Christian picks it up in its Christian logic. The atheist picks it up in its atheistic logic. And if the atheist can get the Christian into the atheistic logic, then the atheist wins the debate. If the Christian can get the atheist over into the Christian logic, then the Christian wins the debate. And so logic by itself doesn't do anything. Logic, when used by people within that worldview, use it within that worldview. And so people using logic don't make logic not neutral. Logic is neutral, but the people are not. But what does logic itself teach us? We assume the laws of logic are true. We assume that the sense perception we have in the world is true and that logic rules. But what does logic itself teach us? Logic itself teaches us that we have a mind that reasons, that we can think and make decisions. Good decisions, bad decisions. Learn from our mistakes. There is a brain-mind distinction. There is. Logic shows this. If there is a brain-mind distinction, because logic is teaching us that, which worldview best supports the brain-mind distinction? A dualistic worldview, not an atheistic worldview. And what else does it teach us? The laws of logic are abstract. They're immaterial. In other words, they're not contained in the material world. So it teaches us there is an immaterial world. The laws of logic are universal over all thinking. And so it tells us that the immaterial world is sovereign. It governs the world that we see. And then the laws of logic are also conceptual. They are inside our heads. They govern thinking. They cause us to think. The laws of logic are inside our mind. And so when the laws of logic are outside the material world, the best explanation is it's in a mind. And so the laws of logic themselves, outside of whether you are Christian or atheistic, the laws of logic, when we just evaluate them, they teach us that there's an immaterial world, that the immaterial world drives the physical world, and that drive is from a mind that is outside the physical world. And that is why worldviews matter. Worldviews matter, and logic teaches us which worldview best explains the experience that we have in the world. And the best explanation for the laws of logic are an immaterial mind. And the atheist that is claiming Aristotle as their model for logic would have to agree that Aristotle grounded his logic in the mind of a God in the immaterial world. And if they are going to take that ground away by saying there is no immaterial world and there is no mind outside of the physical world in this immaterial world, then the atheist has to then ground their use of logic in the physical world, which is impossible. It's impossible to do that. And so the Christian worldview is a better worldview than the atheistic worldview. And then once we have that established, that the Christian worldview, a dualistic worldview where there is a mind outside the material world that grounds logic, then when we start looking at the evidence, we can establish the how of doing historical research. We look for evidence in that time period of things talked about in that time period about the things we're researching. So we look for Jesus in the time period of the first century. We look for the birth of the church in the first century. And what do we find there? We find the Gospels, we find Paul, we find all of the other epistles, we find secular history, secular governors all writing about Christianity in that first century. What do they say about Christianity? They say Christianity is based on Jesus, that it is a new religion, so it comes out of Judaism. It doesn't exclude that Judaism was ever there. It's just different than Judaism. So it is a religion that comes out of Judaism because the people that are propagating it are Jews who are coming out of there. And they're coming out of there because they say Jesus is their Messiah. And the secular historians agree. Christians worship Jesus as if he is God. The historians will say Jesus was crucified, but his followers kept following him, believing that he rose from the dead and claiming that he was the Messiah. And so that's what we have in history. It's not saying what it means yet. It's just establishing this is what we have. So what are the best explanations for the what that we have? And the best explanations for the what that we have is that these disciples of Jesus who were horrified that what they thought was their Messiah was killed, and they sequestered themselves away, and lots of people ran from Jesus at this point, and there was just this little bitty few who started coming out and saying, Jesus rose from the dead, he appeared to us. And they started proclaiming it all over Judea, and it made its way into Rome that there was such a ruckus that the Roman governor kicked the Jews and Christians out of Rome so that they wouldn't be there. And the best explanation for all of this is the fact that these disciples that claimed they saw Jesus actually saw him. And this is why it is the best explanation. They know whether they are lying or not. Paul knows, as a converted enemy of he's an enemy of Christianity, and he's converted to Christianity because of this resurrection experience that he has with Jesus. He knows whether he's mistaken or not. John knows whether he's mistaken or not. Peter knows whether he's lying about this Jesus or not. James knows whether he's lying about seeing Jesus rise from the dead or not. These people know, and these people go to their grave crucified, burned, thrown off the temple, beaten with sticks, and stoned because of their faith, believing that Jesus rose from the dead because of their experience. The best explanation is they had experiences with the resurrected Jesus. And what they taught is what they believed about their experience. And now it is your decision and mine to believe them or not. So the inference of the best explanation is that we evaluate the worldviews in history. We get the best worldview for our experience, which is a dualistic worldview. And then the best explanation for the historical data is that these people believed they saw Jesus rise from the dead. And the church started because they were willing to go to their grave for it. Is it a logical necessity for me to believe that? No. But that is not the standard for historicity. That is what the Christians did not press. It's what the affirmative team did not press. It's not a logical necessity. It is the best explanation of the historical data that we have. And it is supported by our experience with logic, which is best explained by a dualistic worldview that grounds itself in the mind of an immaterial, sovereign being. And that best explanation is the Bible, especially because of the historical evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. And at this point, I will remind you that Jesus said what? Jesus said, they will not believe even if somebody rises from the dead. Jesus affirmed that there is no logical necessity to this belief. There is no moral necessity to this belief. There is a salvation necessity in this belief. I believe God in what He has said about His Son, about Jesus, so that I will be saved. Some of you don't remember that Jesus said what, so let me read these verses from Luke 16. And He said, that is the rich man who is in the fire of Hades, awaiting the judgment day, and Lazarus, who's died, is sitting in the bosom of Abraham. The rich man speaks to Abraham about Lazarus and says this, "Then I beg you, Father, to send him, Lazarus, to my father's house. For I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come to this place of torment. I want Lazarus to go back from the grave to warn my brothers, so they don't end up where I am." But Abraham said, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. Let them believe the Old Testament. Let them believe what the God of the Old Testament has said about the coming Messiah and salvation." And he said, "No, Father Abraham. But if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." And he said to them, "If they do not believe Moses and the prophets, if they refuse to believe that God is the God of the Old Testament scriptures, and what He has said about a coming Messiah, and what He has said about how to be saved from the devil who deceived mankind and they fell into sin, if they refuse to believe what the Old Testament has said, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead." And Jesus proved this. Jesus proved this claim, this teaching that He did in Luke 16. He proved it. He proved it when He was raising people from the dead, including Lazarus, who He rose from the dead. And people refused to believe, although they saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead. They refused to believe. They actually wanted to kill Lazarus instead of believing. And Jesus proved it by rising from the dead Himself. So, students, get this in your mind. Proving that Jesus rose from the dead in a debate will not convince somebody if they refuse to believe the scriptures. If they refuse to believe the scriptures, they won't believe you. In other words, if they refuse to come from an atheistic worldview into a Christian worldview, into a biblical worldview, if they refuse to move from one worldview into this Christian worldview established by what scripture says, if they refuse to come to that worldview, they will not believe even if they witness somebody rising from the dead. Jesus could come back from the dead and stand in front of them, and they would refuse to believe it. That's what Jesus said. So the evaluation of the debate, the atheists won the debate, and they were solid in what they were doing as representing the atheistic worldview. The Christians did not support their worldview and support their use of logic, and they did not explain history well. And so the atheists definitely won the debate, but there were things that the atheists could have done to make their position better and stronger. But in the final evaluation of everything, people will not believe that Jesus rose from the dead if they refuse to believe that the scripture is the word of God. And that's where we stand as Christians. We teach the Bible, and we beg God to help people and save people and rescue people from that place of being deceived by the devil and being captured by him to do his will. 2 Peter 2:22-25, I believe that's the passage. They're captured in their thinking by this humanistic starting point of reason. And if God doesn't rescue them by bringing them to faith in the Bible, then they will not believe in it, even if they see somebody rise from the dead. So Christian, your Christian position is in no danger. It's not. Don't let the heat of the debate discourage you. Have a good day, and I will talk to you tomorrow. And atheists, you did a fantastic job of representing that position. I want to commend you for all that you did. It was a fantastic one. However, come to Jesus and find rescue and peace. Have a great day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.